A single mother, struggling to survive, accepts a job as a caregiver. Without knowing what awaits her, she finds herself responsible for a millionaire confined to a wheelchair. Between baths, silences, and secrets, their lives collide in unexpected ways, weaving a story full of emotion and twists that will challenge the fate of both. The autumn in Boston painted the streets of Beacon Hill with shades of amber and red, while Florence Aiken watched through the window of the small apartment on the third floor of an old building on Charles Street. The clock read 5:30 a.m., and she was already up, preparing breakfast for Hunter, her 6-year-old son, who was still sleeping peacefully in the room next door. The apartment, though modest, held memories of better times. Photographs on the walls told the story of a family that had once been whole, Florence younger, with a radiant smile next to Marcus, her late husband. The accident that took him 3 years ago still weighed on her heart, but she had learned to carry that pain with dignity, turning it into strength to raise her son. "Mom?" Hunter's sleepy voice echoed down the hall. The boy appeared in the kitchen, dragging his favorite blanket, a gift from his father. His messy brown hair and green eyes, identical to Marcus's, made Florence's heart tighten every time she saw them. "Good morning, my love," Florence smiled, bending down to hug him. "Did you sleep well?" "I dreamed of dragons again," he replied, climbing up into the kitchen chair. "But this time they were nice and they let me fly with them." Florence served a bowl of cereal for Hunter, watching as he still struggled against sleep. In a few minutes, she would need to take him to Mrs. Thompson's house, their neighbor who took care of him while Florence searched for a job. The situation had become critical since she was laid off from Massachusetts General Hospital 2 months ago. The hospital, facing budget cuts, decided to reduce staff, and Florence, being one of the newest nursing assistants, was one of the first to be let go. The savings, already scarce, were running out, and the bills piled up on the kitchen table as a constant reminder of her precarious situation. "Hunter, dear, finish your breakfast. Mrs. Thompson is waiting," Florence said, trying to keep her voice steady while reviewing the Boston Globe classifieds once again. It was then that her eyes caught a different ad, in a section she would normally overlook. "Urgent. Full-time caregiver needed for private residence in Brookline. Nursing experience required. Accommodation provided. Salary significantly above market. Contact Mrs. Rebecca Blackwood for immediate interview." The name Blackwood made Florence stop. Even in Boston, few did not know the Blackwood family, especially after the accident that paralyzed Landon Blackwood, heir to Blackwood Enterprises. The incident had made headlines in every newspaper just over a year ago. With her hands trembling slightly, Florence picked up the phone. After 3 rings, a refined voice answered, "Blackwood Residence. Good morning. My name is Florence Aiken. I'm calling about the caregiver position." 2 hours later, Florence stood before the imposing iron gates of the Blackwood Mansion in Brookline. The property, with its meticulously kept gardens and Victorian architecture, looked like it was from another century. Rebecca Blackwood, an elegant woman in her 40s, greeted her at the entrance. "Miss Aiken, welcome," Rebecca said with a firm handshake. "Your documents and references from the hospital are impressive. There's just one matter we need to discuss. Your son." Florence's heart froze. "Hunter is 6 years old. Don't worry," Rebecca interrupted with a gentle smile. "The mansion has an entire wing that's empty. You two can stay there. In fact, a bit of youthful life in this house might be just what we need." The relief was brief, as Florence was soon led to the office where Landon Blackwood was waiting for her. The room, with its mahogany-paneled walls and bookshelves full of books, was intimidating. Landon was positioned near the window, his state-of-the-art wheelchair facing the garden. "So you're the new candidate?" His voice was deep and cutting without turning to face her. "How many other jobs have you lost before this one?" Florence felt the blood rise to her face. "Just one, Mr. Blackwood, the hospital where I worked for 5 years. And why should I trust my care to someone who couldn't keep their last job?" "Because I wasn't laid off for incompetence," Florence replied, surprising herself with her firmness. "The hospital made budget cuts, and more importantly, because you need someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth even when it's inconvenient." Finally, Landon turned his chair. His blue eyes, intense and cold, met hers. At 35, he retained an austere beauty, marked by aristocratic features and an expression that blended bitterness and defiance. "You have a son," he observed, studying the resume in his hands. How do you plan to balance his care with the demands of this job? The same way I balanced it for 5 years at the hospital, with organization and dedication. Hunter is an independent and understanding child for his age. A heavy silence filled the room. Rebecca, who had been observing the interaction from the door, looked tense. "The job is yours," Landon declared abruptly, "with 2 conditions. First, you start today. Second, if your son causes any disruption, you both leave immediately." Florence straightened up. "I also have 2 conditions, Mr. Blackwood. First, I need 2 hours today to pick up Hunter and our things. Second, you must treat my son with the same respect you expect to receive." A flash of surprise crossed Landon's face, quickly replaced by an ironic smile. "Interesting. Rebecca, show Miss Aiken to her quarters. And Miss Aiken, welcome to the Blackwood mansion." As Florence left the office, her heart was racing. She had gotten the job, but something told her that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. What she didn't know was that, behind that cold facade, Landon Blackwood was watching her through the reflection in the window, with an expression that mixed curiosity and something else, something he couldn't quite define. The first week at the Blackwood mansion proved to be a test of endurance for Florence. The days began before dawn, and often stretched late into the night. The routine of caring for Landon was meticulously detailed. Each medication had its specific time, each procedure required a particular technique, and any deviation from the protocol was met with sharp criticism. Dr. Harrison insists on 2 daily physical therapy sessions. Martha, the housekeeper who had worked for the Blackwoods for 20 years, explained as she guided Florence through the mansion's halls. "Mr. Landon hates every minute, but it's essential to prevent muscle atrophy." Martha, a 60-year-old woman with grey hair always neatly tied in a bun, became a valuable ally. Her decades of experience in the house provided insightful knowledge about the Blackwood family dynamic. Before the accident, he was different, Martha confided one morning while they prepared Landon's breakfast. "Always reserved, yes, but there was a kindness in him. The accident didn't just break his spine, it broke something inside him." The first physical therapy session Florence led was particularly challenging. Landon remained deathly silent during the exercises, his clenched jaw betraying the pain he refused to admit. "You're doing it wrong," he snapped when Florence tried to adjust the position of his leg. Caroline knew exactly how— "I'm not Caroline," Florence interrupted firmly. "And if you give me a chance, instead of comparing every move I make to your old caregiver, maybe we can find a method that works for both of us." The silence that followed was tense, but something subtly changed in Landon's gaze. It was as though, for the first time, he truly saw her. Hunter's adaptation to the mansion was surprisingly smooth. The boy found a personal paradise in the vast gardens, where he spent hours exploring under Martha's watchful eye. Frank, the middle-aged gardener with an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, became his adventure companion. "You know, Mr. Frank," Hunter asked one day as he helped plant tulips, "why doesn't Mr. Landon ever come to the garden? Doesn't he like flowers?" Frank exchanged a meaningful look with Florence, who was pruning roses nearby. "Well, young man, sometimes people get hurt in a way that can't be seen on the outside. Mr. Landon used to love this garden. He even planned that Japanese rose bed himself." The mention of the garden during dinner that night provoked an unexpected reaction from Landon. "The blue roses," he murmured, almost to himself. "They were the last ones I planted before." His voice faltered, and the heavy silence that followed was broken by Hunter, who came running into the dining room, carrying something in his small hands. "Mr. Landon, look what I found in the garden." It was a baby sparrow fallen from its nest. "Mr. Frank said we need to take care of it until it can fly again." Florence felt panic freeze her blood. It was the first time Hunter had directly addressed Landon, and she feared his boss's reaction. To her surprise, Landon leaned forward slightly, examining the bird with interest. "Do you know that taking care of a wild bird is a big responsibility?" His voice, usually sharp, was strangely gentle. "I can do it," Hunter replied, his eyes shining. "Mommy taught me that we have to be kind to those who need help." The look Landon gave Florence was indescribable, a mix of surprise and something deeper, more vulnerable. The arrival of Dr. James Harrison, Landon's neurologist, brought a new dynamic to the mansion. Tall, with prematurely graying hair and a calming presence, the doctor was one of the few people Landon treated with genuine respect. "The tests show progress, Landon," Dr. Harrison explained during a consultation. The sensation in your lower limbs is gradually increasing. With intensive therapy, you could—" "No," Landon interrupted sharply. "We've discussed this. I don't want to raise false hopes." Florence, who was organizing the medications in the cabinet, couldn't help but intervene. "Excuse me, Dr. Harrison, but what kind of specific therapy do you suggest?" Landon's furious glare hit her like a bolt of lightning, but she stood her ground. The doctor, sensing the tension, replied diplomatically, "Hydrotherapy would be an excellent start. The mansion has a heated pool that has been closed for months." "And it will remain closed," Landon declared, his voice cold. "Miss Aiken, I would appreciate it if you kept your medical opinions to yourself." Later that night, as she helped Landon get ready for bed, Florence noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he manipulated the wheelchair controls. "You're afraid?" she said softly. Not as an accusation, but as an observation. "Don't be ridiculous," he replied, but his voice lacked its usual sharpness. "Fear isn't ridiculous, Mr. Blackwood. What's ridiculous is letting fear win without fighting." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was laden with unspoken words, with truths struggling to rise to the surface. The routine at the mansion was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Victoria Blackwood, Landon's mother. Tall, elegant, with the same piercing blue eyes as her son, she brought with her an aura of sophistication and barely disguised tension. "Landon, dear," her mellifluous voice echoed through the entrance hall. "You haven't been answering my calls for weeks." "Maybe because I have nothing to say, Mother," Landon replied, his expression closed off. Victoria turned her attention to Florence, scrutinizing her with a critical eye. "So you're the new nurse. Rebecca told me about you and your son. It must be challenging, raising a child on your own." The condescending tone made Florence's blood boil, but before she could respond, Hunter's voice rang out from the top of the stairs. "Grandma Victoria, Mr. Landon told me stories about you." The surprise on Victoria's face was genuine. "He did?" She looked at her son, who appeared equally puzzled. "Yes, about when you lived in France and you grew lavender in the garden," Hunter continued, carefully descending the stairs. "He said the smell reminded him of home, even when he was far away." Florence watched as a subtle transformation occurred on Victoria's face, a near imperceptible softening of her features. Landon, on the other hand, seemed lost in distant memories. The tension in the mansion reached its peak during a formal dinner, when Victoria announced her plans. "I found an excellent clinic in Switzerland. The best specialists, revolutionary treatments—" "No," Landon interrupted, his voice as sharp as steel. "Son, be reasonable. You can't stay hidden in this mansion forever." "I can, and I will. This matter is closed." Florence, who was serving dinner, noticed how Landon's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white with tension. "Mr. Landon," Hunter's voice broke the tense silence. "Do you want to see how our little bird is doing? It can flap its wings now." The change was instant. The tension in Landon's shoulders visibly eased. "After dinner, Hunter," he replied, his voice noticeably softer. Victoria observed the interaction with wide eyes, and Florence realized something important was happening, a small crack in the armor Landon had built around himself. That night, after putting Hunter to bed, Florence found Landon in the office, staring out the window into the darkness. "You know what's ironic, Miss Aiken?" He spoke without turning. "I spent years traveling the world, building the Blackwood Empire, always rushing, always seeking more. And now, trapped in this chair, I realize I never truly saw what was right in front of me. It's never too late to start seeing, Mr. Blackwood." He turned his chair to face her, and for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Florence saw vulnerability in his eyes. "And what if what I see isn't what I want to find? Then you learn to accept, adapt, and move on, like we all do." The arrival of autumn brought new colors to the garden and subtle changes in the mansion's dynamics. Hunter started attending the local school, bringing with him stories and renewed energy. To everyone's surprise, it was to Landon that he ran first upon returning, eager to share his day's adventures. One afternoon, Florence found the two of them in the office, Hunter drawing on the floor while Landon worked on his laptop. The scene was so natural, so domestic that her heart tightened. "Mom," Hunter exclaimed when he saw her, "Mr. Landon is teaching me French. Did you know he lived in Paris?" "I didn't know," Florence replied, noticing how Landon avoided her gaze. "You have many hidden talents, Mr. Blackwood. Just a few memories from a past life, Miss Aiken. But there was something different in his voice, a softness that hadn't been there before, a warmth that was beginning to melt the ice of his isolation. Winter arrived in Boston with an unrelenting force, turning the Blackwood mansion into a white fortress against the grey sky. It was on one of those icy mornings that fate decided to intervene unexpectedly in the lives of its inhabitants. Florence was assisting Landon with his morning physical therapy when the phone rang. It was from Hunter's school. The boy had slipped on the ice in the playground and injured his arm. The immediate panic on her face must have been visible, because before she could say anything, Landon was already taking action. "Peterson," he called to his driver over the intercom, "prepare the car immediately. Florence, go with him." "But Mr. Blackwood, your session—" "My session can wait. Your son cannot." That moment marked a subtle yet significant change. It was the first time Landon called her by her first name, and there was genuine concern in his voice that caught her off guard. At the hospital, while Hunter was being examined, fortunately, only a mild bruise, Florence received an unexpected message. A photo of the little bird they had rescued months earlier, now fully recovered, perched on the window of Landon's office. The message simply read, "He came back to visit. I think he misses his little savior." The gesture, seemingly simple, carried a deeper meaning. Landon was trying, in his own way, to offer comfort. When they returned to the mansion, it felt different. Martha had prepared hot chocolate, and in the living room, to Florence's astonishment, Landon was sitting by the lit fireplace, a storybook in his lap. "I thought maybe," he started, a hint of embarrassment in his voice, "Hunter might like to hear some stories while he rests." The smile that lit up the boy's face was like a ray of sunshine in the storm. Over the next few hours, Landon transported Hunter, and secretly Florence, into worlds of adventure and magic, his rich voice bringing dragons, knights, and warrior princesses to life. It was that night, after putting Hunter to bed, that Florence found Landon in the hallway, staring at the snow through the tall windows. "Thank you," she said softly, "for today, for everything." "Don't thank me," he replied, turning his chair to face her. "Hunter, he reminds me of something I lost a long time ago." "What?" "The ability to see beauty in the little things, to believe that stories can have happy endings." The moment was interrupted by the abrupt arrival of Alexander Blackwood, Landon's younger brother. Tall, with the same aristocratic bearing as the family, but with a wilder gleam in his eyes, Alexander brought with him a storm different from the one howling outside. "So the rumors are true," he declared, eyeing Florence with an interest that made her uncomfortable. "My brother has finally found someone who can tolerate him." "Alexander," Landon's voice had a warning tone, "what are you doing here? Can't I visit my dear brother, especially when I hear he's changing?" The tension between the brothers was palpable, filled with untold stories and old resentments. Florence tried to slip away discreetly, but Alexander's voice stopped her. "Stay, Miss Aiken. Actually, your presence is quite relevant to what I have to say." Landon moved his chair, subtly positioning himself between Florence and his brother. "Say what you want, Alexander. The board is concerned, Landon. Your seclusion since the accident, your refusal to attend meetings. Some members are questioning your ability to lead the company." "The company is having its best results in years," Landon replied, his voice icy. "Yes, thanks to the work you do from here, isolated in this mansion. But they want more. They want a strong, present leader. And there are rumors about your involvement with an employee." Florence's blood ran cold. She hadn't realized how her closeness to Landon could be perceived by the outside world. "My personal life is none of the board's business," Landon declared, "and I suggest you keep your insinuations to yourself. I'm just trying to protect you, brother. The press would be relentless if they found out. Blackwood heir involved with single nurse. Imagine the headlines. Leave." Landon's voice trembled with suppressed rage. "Now." After Alexander left, a heavy silence fell over the mansion. Florence felt torn between indignation and concern. Alexander's words had exposed truths she had been trying to ignore, the difference between their worlds, the complications of their growing closeness. "Florence," Landon broke the silence, his voice softer now, "I'm sorry for my brother's behavior. You don't have to apologize, but he's right about one thing. My presence here could hurt your reputation, your position in the company. Do you really think I care about that?" There was an intensity in his eyes that made her hold her breath. "Since you and Hunter arrived, This mansion has become a home again. For the first time since the accident, His voice faltered, and Florence realized they were on the edge of something dangerous, something that could change everything. The moment was interrupted by a cry from Hunter's room. When they arrived, they found the boy in the midst of a nightmare, calling out for his father. Florence hugged him, murmuring comforting words, while Landon watched from the door, an expression of pain on his face that had nothing to do with his physical condition. The next morning, Rebecca arrived early, bringing disturbing news. Alexander's visit had not been a coincidence. A special board meeting had been called for the following week. "They want you there, Landon," Rebecca explained, worry evident in her voice. "In person, and there's more. Alexander is gathering support for a possible vote to oust you." The news hit like a bomb. Florence, who was serving breakfast, felt the weight of the words. It was her job to care for Landon, but how could she protect him from a threat coming from his own family? "I can't go," Landon declared, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice that Florence had never heard before. "You can," she found herself saying. "And you will." Both looked at her, surprised by the firmness in her voice. "Florence," Rebecca began, but she continued, "Mr. Blackwood didn't build this company to leave it in the hands of people who don't care about its true purpose. And more importantly, you can't let fear win, not now." The silence that followed was electric. Landon looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, a mix of admiration and something deeper in his eyes. "She's right," Rebecca finally said, "and I have an idea of how we can make this work." The days that followed were intense. Florence worked tirelessly with Landon, preparing him not only physically but emotionally for the challenge ahead. The physical therapy sessions became more rigorous, and for the first time he didn't protest. One night, while helping him with strengthening exercises, Landon held her hand. "Why do you do this?" he asked softly. "Why do you care so much?" Florence felt her heart race but kept her voice steady. "Because I believe some people deserve a second chance. Because sometimes we need someone to believe in us more than we believe in ourselves." The look they exchanged in that moment said more than words ever could. There was mutual recognition, a deep understanding that their lives were irrevocably intertwined, but fate still had more surprises in store. The next morning, Florence found an envelope at her door. Inside were documents that could change everything. The decision she would have to make would not only affect her life, but the future of everyone at the Blackwood mansion. The envelope Florence found contained a job offer from Massachusetts General Hospital. Her former workplace wanted her back, with a promotion and a significantly higher salary. The letter mentioned that the budget cuts had been reversed and her experience was highly valued. Under normal circumstances, it would be an irresistible opportunity, but the circumstances were far from normal. Sitting on her bed, Florence reread the letter while she listened to the voices of Hunter and Landon coming from the sunroom. Her son was teaching Landon about the different types of birds that visited the feeders they had installed together. "Look, Mr. Landon, the red cardinal is back," Hunter's excited voice echoed. "He must have told his friends about the good food here." "Very observant, Hunter." Landon's response carried a tone of affection that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. "You know, when I was your age, I used to watch birds with my grandfather in this very garden." Martha found Florence still contemplating the letter. The housekeeper, with her years of wisdom, sat beside her. "When I came to work for the Blackwoods," Martha began, "Landon was just a boy, so different from now, full of dreams and laughter. The weight of being a Blackwood slowly took that away from him, long before the accident." "And now?" Florence asked softly. "Now, for the first time in years, I see that boy coming back. And it's not because of the physical therapy or the doctors. It's because of you and Hunter." The sound of laughter interrupted their conversation. Hunter had convinced Landon to feed the birds personally, and some of them were bold enough to land near his wheelchair. "You know what this reminds me of?" Rebecca's voice came from the doorway. She was carrying an old box. "I found this in the attic." Inside the box were old photographs. Young Landon, smiling, surrounded by a group of children in wheelchairs. "It was a college project of his," Rebecca explained. "He created a therapeutic riding program for children with disabilities. It was his passion before our father convinced him to focus only on business." Florence examined the photos, her heart tightening as she saw the genuine happiness on Landon's face. An idea began to form in her mind, a way to confront not only the board, but also the demons that haunted Landon. That night, after dinner, she found him in his office working on preparations for the board meeting. "I found something today," she said, placing the photos on his desk. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" Landon looked at the photographs, a shadow of emotion crossing his face. "Because it belongs to the past, to a Landon that no longer exists." "I disagree. I've seen how you are with Hunter, how your presence lights up this house. The man in these photos is still here, Landon. He's just been lost for a while." It was the first time she had used his first name without the formal Mr. Blackwood, and the impact was immediate. Landon looked up, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "What do you suggest?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Use this at the board meeting. Show them that Blackwood Enterprises can be more than just profits and acquisitions. Take up the project again, expand it, turn it into a foundation." The silence that followed was broken by footsteps in the hallway. Alexander had returned, this time accompanied by Victoria. "What a touching scene." His sarcasm was sharp. "The board will be very interested to hear how you spend your nights, brother." "Alexander," Victoria reprimanded him, but her eyes studied Florence with a mix of concern and something else. Understanding, perhaps. "Mother, please," Alexander continued. "We can't ignore the obvious. Landon is being manipulated by this. Watch your next words." Landon's voice carried a threat that Florence had never heard before. "You may be my brother, but there are limits I won't allow you to cross." Victoria stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the photographs on the desk. "I remember this project," she said softly. "Our father was furious when he found out you were wasting time with charity instead of learning about mergers and acquisitions. And he was right," Alexander interjected. "The company needs a strong leader, not a philanthropist in a wheelchair." The sound of something breaking made everyone turn. Hunter was standing in the doorway, a cup of hot chocolate shattered at his feet, tears in his eyes. "Hunter!" Florence ran to him, but the boy had already turned and run off. "See what you've caused," Alexander accused. "This house has turned into a circus." "Enough!" Victoria's voice sliced through the air like a whip. "Alexander, you're leaving now. And as for you, Landon, I think it's time to decide what kind of man you want to be. The one our father wanted you to be, or the one you really are." The silence that followed their departure was deafening. Florence met Landon's eyes, and in that moment, they both knew there was no turning back. Whatever decisions they made in the coming hours would change their lives forever. The morning of the board meeting dawned with a relentless snowstorm over Boston. Florence helped Landon prepare, adjusting his tie with fingers that trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the tension of the moment. "You don't need to go," Landon said softly, his eyes meeting hers through the mirror. "Hunter is still shaken up from what happened yesterday. He'll be fine with Martha. And you need me there," Florence replied, her fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary on the tie knot. The journey to Blackwood Enterprises headquarters was silent, the limousine gliding through the snow-covered streets of Boston. Florence watched Landon, who kept his eyes fixed on a folder of documents, not the financial reports Alexander had expected, but the reworked Equine Therapy Foundation proposal. The towering glass and steel structure of Blackwood Enterprises loomed against the grey sky, a monument to the family's power and influence. In the lobby, Rebecca waited, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "The board is in session," she informed them as she led them to the private elevator. "Alexander arrived early and has been speaking with the members individually." "Of course," Landon murmured, his jaw tense. "He's always been good at manipulating people." On the 50th floor, the elevator doors opened into a marble corridor that led to the boardroom. Florence felt the weight of the stairs as they entered, pushing Landon's wheelchair, some curious, others openly hostile. Alexander was standing near the head of the table, a satisfied smile on his face. "Brother, glad you could make it. And you brought your nurse. Miss Aiken is here as my personal assistant," Landon responded, his voice firm. "And she has every right to attend this meeting." The next 3 hours were intense. Alexander presented charts and projections, arguing that the company needed a more dynamic presence at the helm. His eyes frequently flicked toward Landon's wheelchair, the implication clear in every word. When it was his turn to speak, Landon surprised everyone by asking Florence to distribute copies of a different presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his voice gaining strength with each word, "I'm not here today just to defend my position as CEO, but to propose a new direction for Blackwood Enterprises." Images of the old equine therapy project appeared on the screen, along with projections for a much larger foundation. 15 years ago, I started a project that my father considered a distraction. Today, I see it as a vision of what our company could be. Florence observed the faces around the table, noticing how some of the older board members leaned forward, intrigued. Victoria, sitting in a corner, had tears in her eyes. Our company has thrived by focusing solely on numbers, Landon continued. But what if we could do more? What if we could combine profit with purpose? Alexander tried to interrupt, but was silenced by one of the older board members. Go on, Landon. We want to hear more about this foundation. During the presentation, Florence noticed something shifting in the room. Not just Landon defending his position, but a man rediscovering his passion, his purpose. The pivotal moment came when he shared his personal experience. My accident taught me that physical limitations do not define a person. What defines us are our choices, our ability to adapt, and above all, our humanity. His eyes met Florence's for a brief moment, loaded with meaning. I learned this not only through my own experience, but by watching how a 6-year-old views the world, without prejudice, without limitations, just possibilities. The vote that followed was tense. When the final vote was counted, Alexander stormed out of the room abruptly, his defeat clear on his red, angry face. Victoria was the first to approach Landon. Your father would be proud, she said, her voice choked, not by the result of the vote, but by you finally finding your voice. The return to the mansion was very different from the journey there. The snow had lightened and a faint sun began to break through the clouds. Hunter was waiting at the entrance, bouncing with excitement. Did you make it? He asked, his eyes shining with anticipation. Landon smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face completely. Yes, champ, we did. And you know what? I need your help with a special project. That night after Hunter had gone to bed, Florence found Landon in the sunroom. He was staring at the stars through the glass ceiling, a glass of wine untouched beside him. What are you thinking about? She asked, sitting beside him. How ironic life is, he replied, turning to face her. I spent years building walls around myself, convinced that it was the only way to survive. And then you and Hunter show up, and in a few months, you've torn down every single one. Maybe some walls need to fall so we can truly live. The silence that followed was laden with contained emotion. Landon reached out, gently touching Florence's face. I'm in love with you, he said simply. Probably from the first day when you had the courage to confront me in that office. Florence's heart stopped for a moment, then raced. Landon, you don't need to say anything, he continued. I know it's complicated. I'm your boss, there's Hunter to consider, and all the baggage I've been carrying. Florence interrupted him by placing a finger softly on his lips. I'm in love with you too, and yes, it's complicated and scary, and probably going to cause a scandal. But since when has that stopped us from doing something? The kiss that followed was gentle, hesitant at first, then deeper, filled with promises and possibilities. When they pulled apart, they both laughed as snowflakes began to fall through the glass ceiling. But life rarely allows perfect moments to last long. The next morning, the newspapers blared sensationalist headlines about the scandalous romance between the Blackwood heir and his nurse. Alexander had fulfilled his threat, leaking the story to the press. We shouldn't have been so careless, Landon said, throwing the newspaper aside in frustration. No, Florence replied firmly. I won't regret that moment. Not any of them. Rebecca arrived early, bringing more troubling news. The press was camped out at the mansion gates, and some key investors had expressed concerns about the emotional stability of the company's leadership. Let them talk, Landon declared, surprising everyone. I'm holding a press conference today. It's time to show the world that love is not a scandal and that a wheelchair doesn't define who I am. The transformation in Landon was evident. The bitter man Florence had met months ago had given way to someone stronger, more complete. And she was there by his side as he faced each new challenge. Hunter, with his childlike wisdom, summed it up perfectly during breakfast. You know, Mr. Landon, that little bird we saved, it didn't fly away because it was cured. It flew because it was finally no longer afraid. Florence and Landon exchanged a meaningful glance, understanding the deep truth in the boy's innocent words. Sometimes the most important healing is not physical, but emotional. The press conference was scheduled for late afternoon in the Blackwood Enterprises auditorium. Florence was helping Landon get ready when Victoria unexpectedly appeared in the office. We need to talk, she said, her tone softer than usual. About you and Florence." Landon prepared himself to defend his feelings, but Victoria surprised him. "When your father passed away," she began, sitting down gracefully, "he left a letter for you. I never found the right moment to give it to you, perhaps because I needed time to accept its content." She took a yellowed envelope from her bag, her hands trembling slightly as she handed it to Landon. Florence made a move to leave them some privacy, but Victoria stopped her. "Stay, dear. You need to hear this too." Landon carefully opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the words written in his father's firm handwriting. "My son, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here to correct my mistakes. The biggest of them all was suffocating your dreams in the name of Blackwood tradition, that equine therapy project. You were right and I was terribly wrong. I saw the light in your eyes when you worked with those children, the same light that faded when I forced you to take over the presidency of the company. Forgive me for being so blind. A man's true strength does not lie in his ability to control others, but in his courage to follow his heart, even when the whole world tells him he's wrong. Your father, William Blackwood." The silence that followed the reading was deep. Landon had tears in his eyes, something Florence had never seen before. "Why now, Mother?" he asked softly. "Because I finally see in you the same light your father spoke of, and it's Florence who brought it back." The revelation of the letter brought a new dimension to their struggle. During the press conference, Landon not only defended his relationship with Florence, he announced a complete restructuring of Blackwood Enterprises with the creation of a division dedicated to social projects. "My disability taught me that limitations are only what we allow them to be," he declared to the reporters. "And my relationship with Florence taught me that the true worth of a person is not in their last name or bank account, but in their ability to love and inspire change." The media's reaction was mixed, but support came from unexpected places. Other disabled CEOs publicly voiced their support. Disability rights organizations praised Landon's stance. And most importantly, Blackwood Enterprises employees showed newfound respect for their leader. Hunter, watching all of this with his perceptive child's eyes, made an observation during dinner that touched everyone. "Mom, remember when you said sometimes we have to lose something to gain something better? I think Mr. Landon lost his legs, but he gained a bigger heart." The profound simplicity of the boy's words brought tears to the eyes of everyone at the table. Landon extended his hand, holding Hunter's small hand. "You know, champ, you're right. And do you know what else I gained? A family." The following days brought new challenges. Alexander, though defeated at the board meeting, continued his attacks through the press. But each attempt to harm them only strengthened the bond between Florence, Landon, and Hunter. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of the first equipment for the new equine therapy center on the mansion grounds, Florence found Landon in his office, working on something he had been keeping secret. "What are you up to?" she asked, noticing his mysterious air. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he replied, quickly putting away some papers. "But first, we need to talk about the future. This sounds serious." "It is serious. Florence, you've transformed my life in ways I never thought possible. But as long as you continue to be my employee, there will always be people questioning our relationship." Florence's heart stopped for a moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that it's time for you to follow your own dream. I remember you mentioning that you always wanted to complete your nursing education. Landon, I can't just..." "You can. The Blackwood Foundation is offering full scholarships for healthcare professionals, and by coincidence, you're the first beneficiary." Tears came before Florence could hold them back. They weren't just tears of gratitude, but of understanding. Landon was giving her more than a professional opportunity. He was giving her equality. "And what about your care?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have a whole team of professionals at my disposal." "What I need from you isn't your professional skills, Florence. It's your heart." That night, lying in bed, Florence reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. From an unemployed nurse to a nursing student with a full scholarship, from a struggling single mother to a beloved and respected woman. The transformation wasn't just hers, it was theirs. Hunter was thriving in school, his grades improving significantly. Landon had become not just a father figure to him, but a true mentor, encouraging his natural curiosity and love for nature. And Landon, the change in him was the most striking of all. The bitter, isolated man had given way to someone who smiled more, who allowed himself to be vulnerable, who found joy in the small things in life. Spring arrived in Boston with an explosion of color and renewal. The Equine Therapy Center was nearly complete, and the Blackwood mansion had transformed into a well-organized construction site, with workers adapting the facilities to welcome the first children into the program. Florence divided her time between nursing school and helping with the organization of the center. Her life had found a balance she had never thought possible. However, fate had other plans to test the strength of their newly formed family. It all began on a seemingly ordinary morning. Hunter was having breakfast with Landon, excitedly discussing the new colt that had arrived for the program, when Rebecca burst into the dining room, her face pale. "Landon, you need to see this," she said, handing him a tablet. On the screen, sensationalist headlines exploded across all the major national newspapers. Blackwood Empire under federal investigation. Alexander's face appeared on several of the articles, alongside photographs of the FBI conducting searches at company offices. "Impossible," Landon murmured, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. "All our records are spotless." "It's not the current records under investigation," Rebecca explained in a low voice. "It's transactions from 15 years ago, from the time of the original equine therapy project." Florence, who had just entered the room, felt her blood run cold. Hunter, sensing the tension, stopped eating and looked at the adults with concern. "Alexander," Landon said the name like a curse. "He was in the finance department back then. He would have known." "Not just known," a familiar voice completed from the door. Victoria Blackwood was there, looking as though she had aged years in just a few days. He orchestrated it all. The revelation that followed was devastating. Victoria explained that Alexander had discovered compromising documents, not about the equine therapy project itself, but about funds embezzled by him, using the project as a cover. Now, 15 years later, he planned to use these documents to destroy Landon's reputation and take control of the company. "But why now?" Florence asked, holding Landon's hand, which was shaking with anger. "Because the new project threatens to expose everything," Rebecca replied. Alexander must have realized that a full audit would be required for the Foundation's implementation. "Mama," Hunter's small voice cut through the tension, "is Mr. Landon going to have to leave like my dad?" The silence that followed was deafening. Florence hugged her son, while Landon turned his chair to face the boy. "No, champ," he answered firmly. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." But keeping that promise would prove to be more difficult than they imagined. In the weeks that followed, the investigation intensified. Journalists camped out at the mansion gates, speculating about Landon's involvement in the alleged embezzlement. The tension reached its peak when Alexander made an unexpected move. He called for an exclusive press conference. "I can't carry this burden anymore," he declared before the cameras, fake tears in his eyes. "As the younger brother, I've always protected Landon. But now, seeing how he is using the Foundation to manipulate public opinion, I can't stay silent any longer." Florence watched the broadcast in horror, holding Landon's hand tightly. But it was Hunter's reaction that surprised everyone. "He's lying," the boy shouted at the television. "Mr. Landon, you have to show them the pictures from your secret notebook." "What notebook, sweetheart?" Florence asked, confused. Hunter ran out of the room and came back moments later, holding an old worn notebook. "I found it in the attic when I was looking for Christmas decorations. It has lots of numbers and names." Landon took the notebook with trembling hands. It was his father, William Blackwood's financial ledger, kept secret for years. "Father always said he kept parallel records," Victoria murmured, flipping through the yellowed pages. "He said it was insurance against—" Oh, God. There, in meticulous detail, were all the financial transactions from that time, including notes about Alexander's suspicious activities. William Blackwood had documented everything, quietly protecting his older son. "This changes everything," Rebecca said, already on the phone with the company's lawyers. But the real twist was yet to come. While the legal team worked to present the new evidence, Florence received a disturbing call from the hospital where she was doing her residency. "Miss Aiken, we have a patient insisting on speaking with you. He says he's your son's father." The world seemed to stop. Marcus was dead. She had watched over him, buried him, mourned his loss for 3 years. But when she arrived at the hospital accompanied by Landon, she discovered that the man in the bed was not Marcus. "My name is James Carter," the man explained, his voice weak. I was in the car with Marcus that night. I was the one who survived, not him. I spent the last 3 years in a coma, and when I finally woke up, the guilt was too much. The revelation brought a wave of painful questions. James explained that he and Marcus had been investigating irregularities at a pharmaceutical company, irregularities that, as they later discovered, were connected to Alexander Blackwood's embezzlement. The accident wasn't an accident, James revealed, tears streaming down his scarred face. We were forced off the road. Marcus, he discovered something big, something that involved Blackwood Enterprises. Landon gripped Florence's hand tightly as she processed the information. Alexander, he said, his voice heavy with controlled anger. He wasn't just embezzling money, he was involved in something much bigger. Events unfolded rapidly after this revelation. The FBI investigation shifted direction, focusing not just on the financial embezzlement, but on a much larger conspiracy involving pharmaceutical companies and illegal testing. Alexander, realizing his plan was falling apart, made one last desperate attempt. On a stormy night, he broke into the mansion, determined to destroy any remaining evidence. What he didn't expect was to find Hunter awake, fascinated by the lightning. The boy, upon seeing him in Landon's office, did the only thing he could. He ran to alert the house. "Mr. Landon, Mom, Uncle Alexander is trying to destroy Grandpa William's papers." The chaos that followed was intense. Alexander, cornered and desperate, revealed the entire truth, how he had manipulated events for years, how Marcus's accident wasn't the first he had orchestrated, how Landon's accident had been less accidental than everyone had thought. "Do you think that break failed on its own, brother?" He laughed bitterly as the police handcuffed him. "You were getting too close to the truth back then too, but unlike Marcus, you survived." Alexander's confession, captured by the mansion's security cameras, was the final piece of the puzzle. The media, which had so harshly judged him, now exalted Landon as a hero who had survived multiple assassination attempts to expose a criminal conspiracy. But for Florence, Landon, and Hunter, the true victory was not in the headlines. It was in the peace they had finally found, in the justice for Marcus, and in the strength of the love that bound them together. In the weeks following the revelations, the Blackwood Mansion became a symbol of resilience and renewal. The Equine Therapy Center, far from being abandoned due to the scandal, gained even more public support. Companies and individuals from all over the country offered donations and backing for the project. Florence met James Carter again, this time with Hunter. The meeting was emotionally intense, with James sharing stories about Marcus that even she had never known, how he had uncovered the irregularities, how he had planned to expose everything, and how his last thought had been about his son and wife. "He made me promise," James said, his voice choked, "that if anything happened to him, I would find a way to protect you. I failed that promise for 3 years, trapped in a hospital bed. But now you helped make it right," Florence finished softly, holding his hand. Marcus would be proud. Hunter, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, surprised everyone with his insight. "So my dad was a hero, like Mr. Landon?" "Yes, champ," Landon replied, entering the hospital room. "Your dad was a hero who gave his life trying to do the right thing, and now thanks to him and Mr. Carter, we can continue his work." James's recovery became part of the family's routine. He was transferred to a rehabilitation center near the mansion, where he would also become one of the first patients in the hydrotherapy program once he was stronger. Victoria, deeply shaken by the extent of Alexander's actions, dedicated herself to reorganizing the entire administrative structure of Blackwood Enterprises. Her experience and connections were crucial in stabilizing the company during the crisis. "You know," she said to Florence over an afternoon tea, "I always thought Landon needed someone worthy of the Blackwood name. How foolish I was. He needed someone who would make him forget the weight of that name." Spring advanced, and with it, the Equine Therapy Center began to come to life. The first group of children arrived on a sunny April morning. Among them was Emily, a 7-year-old girl with cerebral palsy, whose eyes lit up when she saw Landon in his wheelchair. "You're just like me," she exclaimed with joy. "Not exactly like you," Landon replied with a gentle smile. "Each of us is unique. But do you know what we have in common? The ability to overcome challenges." The success of the program was immediate and transformative. Children who could hardly communicate began to open up, finding confidence and joy in their contact with the horses. Parents who had lost hope saw their children progressing in ways they never thought possible. Hunter became something of a mascot for the program, helping the children feel comfortable with the animals. His gentle and understanding nature made him the perfect companion for the young participants. One day, while watching Hunter help Emily brush one of the ponies, Florence felt Landon take her hand. "I have something to show you," he said, a mysterious gleam in his eyes. He guided her to a part of the property under renovation covered by tarps. With a signal, the workers removed the coverings, revealing an impressive structure, a full medical center equipped with the latest rehabilitation equipment. "The Florence Aiken Rehabilitation Center," he announced, unveiling the sign. "A place where dedicated professionals like you can make a difference in the lives of people who need a second chance." Florence was speechless, tears streaming down her face. "Landon, Wait, there's more," he continued, maneuvering his chair to face her. "Florence Aiken, you've transformed my life in ways I never thought possible. You taught me that limitations are only what we allow them to be, that true love sees no barriers, doesn't care about status or physical condition." With slightly trembling hands, he took a small box from his pocket. "I can't kneel to do this the traditional way, but my heart is at your feet. Florence, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The moment was interrupted by a joyful exclamation. Hunter had escaped from his riding lesson and was running toward them, followed by Emily in her motorized wheelchair. "Say yes, Mom!" Hunter shouted, jumping with excitement. "Please say yes. It's like the stories," Emily added, her eyes sparkling. "When the prince finds his princess." Florence looked at the scene, her son radiant with happiness, a child who already considered part of the family, and the man who had not only won her heart, but transformed her entire life. "Yes," she answered, her voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times yes. The kiss that sealed the moment was interrupted by applause. Every employee, patient, and family member from the center had gathered to witness the occasion. Victoria was crying openly, Rebecca was beaming with joy, and even James, in his wheelchair, had been brought in to join the celebration. Later that night, as the mansion quieted after a spontaneous engagement party, Florence found Hunter and Landon in the sunroom, watching the stars through the glass ceiling. "So you know what this means?" Hunter asked, nestled between them. "It means we're officially a real family now." "We've always been a real family, champ," Landon replied, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "The ring just makes it official for the rest of the world." Florence watched the two of them, her son and the man who had transformed their lives, and felt her heart swell with love. The road to this point had not been easy, but every obstacle, every challenge had been worth it. Autumn had returned to Boston, painting the Blackwood Mansion gardens in shades of gold and crimson. A year had passed since the marriage proposal, and the property was unrecognizable. The Florence Aiken Rehabilitation Center was operating at full capacity. The equine therapy program had become a national reference, and the once gloomy mansion now pulsed with life and hope. On the eve of the wedding, Florence found herself in Landon's old office, now transformed into a community library for patients, reviewing the final details of the ceremony with Rebecca. "I still can't believe you convinced Landon to have the wedding here at the center instead of the Boston Cathedral," Rebecca commented, organizing the scheduling spreadsheets. "It was his idea, actually," Florence replied, smiling as she remembered the conversation. "I said he wanted to celebrate our love in the place that brought us together, surrounded not just by family and friends, but by all the people who are part of this new life we've built." The sound of children's laughter filled the office through the open windows. In the garden, Hunter was leading a kind of informal rehearsal with the children from the center who would participate in the ceremony. Emily, now more confident in her wheelchair decorated with flowers, was to be the main flower girl. "Mom," Hunter called, running into the office, "you need to see this. Mr. Landon is doing something amazing in physical therapy." Florence followed her son to the rehabilitation wing, where a small crowd had gathered around the hydrotherapy pool. Her heart stopped for a moment at the sight. Landon, supported by James and 2 physical therapists, was standing in the shallow water. "Surprise," he said, his voice trembling not from effort but from emotion. "I wanted to wait until tomorrow, but, well, some things can't wait." Through months of intensive therapy and unwavering determination, Landon had regained some sensitivity and movement in his legs. It wasn't a miraculous recovery. He would still depend on the wheelchair for most of his mobility, but it was progress that doctors had deemed impossible. "I decided I want to dance with you at our wedding," he explained, taking a hesitant step in the water. "It won't be a traditional waltz, but it will be perfect," Florence finished, tears streaming down her face. The news of Landon's partial recovery spread quickly, bringing national attention to the work being done at the center. But for the family, the real miracle wasn't the physical steps he was taking, but the emotional journey that had brought them to this point. On the morning of the wedding, the center had been transformed. The sunroom where they had shared their first kiss had become a natural sanctuary, with autumn flowers and soft lights creating a magical atmosphere. Victoria was overseeing the final preparations when an unexpected visitor arrived. Alexander, escorted by guards, had been granted special permission for a brief visit before returning to prison. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his appearance a far cry from the polished executive he had once been. "I've come to apologize, not just to Landon and Florence, but to you too, Mother, and most of all, to Hunter, for the pain I caused your father." The meeting was brief and emotionally charged. Florence, watching from a distance, saw something she never expected to see: genuine remorse in the eyes of the man who had caused so much harm to her family. "He really is changing," James commented, approaching in his wheelchair. "In prison, he started a counseling program for other inmates. The irony is that he had to lose everything to find his own purpose." The ceremony began at sunset. Hunter, immaculate in his little tuxedo, led Emily down the makeshift aisle between the chairs. The little girl spread rose petals from her adapted basket, her eyes sparkling with joy. When Florence appeared wearing a dress that combined elegance with simplicity, the guests sighed in awe, but their eyes were fixed on Landon, who, supported by a specially designed walker, stood at the altar. The officiant, a hospital chaplain who had become a close friend of the family, led a ceremony that blended traditional elements with unique touches that reflected the couple's journey. "True love," he said, "is not just about moments of joy, but about how we face challenges together." Florence and Landon have not only overcome their obstacles, they've turned them into stepping stones to help others rise as well. The vows were exchanged with palpable emotion. Landon spoke about how Florence had brought light back into his life, how she and Hunter had taught him that family isn't defined by blood, but by love. Florence, in turn, spoke about second chances and daily miracles, not just in Landon's physical recovery, but in the small moments that had built their love story. The most touching moment, however, came during the reception. Hunter asked to make a special speech. "When my dad went to heaven," he began, his voice small but firm, "I thought I'd never have a complete family again. But then we met Mr. Landon, sorry, now I have to call him Dad too, and I discovered that love can make families in all different ways." There wasn't a dry eye in the hall when he finished. Landon, visibly emotional, embraced the boy who was now officially his son. The couple's dance was a moment of magic. With the discreet support of a special walker and much determination, Landon and Florence moved gently to the tune of "Can't Help Falling in Love." It wasn't a traditional dance, but it carried a unique beauty in its authenticity. As the night went on, surprises continued to unfold. Victoria announced the creation of an educational foundation in Marcus's name, which would offer scholarships to children from low-income families interested in healthcare careers. Rebecca revealed that the equine therapy program would expand to 5 more cities the following year, bringing hope and recovery to even more families. And James, in a particularly emotional moment, handed Hunter an album of photos recovered from the accident, images of Marcus that the boy had never seen, moments preserved that he could now hold on to forever. Later, when the guests began to leave, Florence found Landon in the sunroom, their special place. He was sitting in his wheelchair, resting after the effort of the ceremony, but his eyes shone with a peaceful happiness. "You know what's funny?" he said, pulling her onto his lap. "I spent so much time hiding from the world in this mansion, and now I can't wait to see what each new day will bring." "And what do you think they'll bring?" Florence asked, settling into his arms. "More miracles," he answered simply, "big and small, like that little bird Hunter saved, like each new smile from the children at the center, like every step I take in physical therapy, like the love I found when I least expected it." Hunter joined them, followed by Emily in her wheelchair. The children were excited about the plans for the new adaptive playground that would be built near the Equine Therapy Center. "And you know the best part?" Hunter said, his eyes sparkling with the unique wisdom of children. Now we have two love stories to tell. My first dad, who was a hero, and my new dad, who showed us that heroes can use wheelchairs too. Florence looked at her family, not the one she had imagined having, but the one fate, in its infinite wisdom, had gifted her. A family built on losses and gains, on overcoming and love, on the simple truth that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as challenges. 5 years had passed since the wedding of Florence and Landon Blackwood. The Blackwood mansion, once a symbol of isolation and sorrow, had become a beacon of hope for thousands of families. On a sunny spring morning, Florence watched from the balcony as Hunter, now 11 years old, helped his adopted sister Sophie mount her favorite pony. The 6-year-old girl, whom they had adopted 2 years prior, had the same condition that had left Landon paraplegic. However, thanks to the equine therapy and the unconditional love of her new family, she thrived each day. "Mom, look!" Sophie shouted, sitting proudly on the adapted saddle. "I'm doing just like Dad taught me." Landon, supervising the session from his wheelchair, smiled with pride. Although he still relied primarily on the wheelchair to move, he could now take a few steps with the aid of crutches, a feat the doctors had deemed impossible. The Florence Aiken Rehabilitation Center had expanded beyond its initial expectations, now occupying much of the property. It included a pediatric wing specializing in therapy and a research center for innovative treatments. Emily, the first wheelchair-bound flower girl at the wedding, had become a kind of junior ambassador for the program, inspiring other children with her determination and joy. Victoria Blackwood, after retiring from the presidency of the board, dedicated her time to the Marcus Aiken Foundation, which had awarded over 1,000 scholarships. James Carter, recovered from his injuries, coordinated a psychological support program for families of patients in rehabilitation. Alexander, serving his sentence, had transformed into an example of redemption. His counseling program in prison became a national model, and through video conferences, he occasionally shared his story with the youth at the center, warning them of the consequences of choices driven by ambition and envy. Rebecca remained the administrative pillar of the entire complex, but now she was assisted by Hunter, who demonstrated a natural talent for connecting with families seeking help. On a special afternoon celebrating the 5th anniversary of the center, the entire family gathered in the sunroom, the place where so many significant moments had taken place. Florence, 7 months pregnant with their 3rd child, watched the scene with teary eyes. Hunter teaching Sophie to play chess, Victoria telling stories to a group of children from the center, Landon discussing expansion plans with Rebecca. "What are you thinking about?" Landon asked, approaching his chair. "How surprising life is," she replied, holding his hand. 6 years ago, I was an unemployed nurse, desperate for an opportunity. Now you're the director of the largest rehabilitation center on the East Coast. An amazing mom, and the woman who taught me to live again," he finished, kissing her hand. The bird that Hunter had saved years ago, or perhaps one of its descendants, landed on the windowsill, its soft song echoing through the room. Sophie pointed at it enthusiastically. "Look, Hunter, it's just like the one in that story you always tell." "It is, little one." Hunter smiled, hugging his sister. "And do you know what it taught us? That sometimes we need to fall to learn how to fly again." Florence and Landon exchanged a meaningful look, understanding the deep truth in their son's words. Their lives had been marked by falls and fresh starts, by losses and gains, but every challenge had made them stronger, closer. The sun set over Blackwood Mansion, its last rays streaming through the glass ceiling of the sunroom, creating a colorful spectacle that seemed to celebrate not only the end of another day, but the beauty of a story that continued to unfold, proving that love, in all its forms, has the power to heal, transform, and create daily miracles. "Do we live happily ever after?" Sophie asked, running to Landon's lap. "No, my love," Landon replied, embracing his daughter while holding Florence's hand. "We live truly with all the challenges and joys that it brings. And that's even better than any fairy tale ending." If this story touched your heart and you want to continue following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our next videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay up to date with new content that can illuminate your journey and bring valuable reflections. If you missed our latest story, here's what happened. An arrogant millionaire plans to impress his new girlfriend with an extravagant dinner at a luxury restaurant. However, upon discovering that his ex-wife works there as a waitress, He turns the occasion into a spectacle of taunts and humiliation. But what begins as a cruel game quickly spirals out of control, leading to an ending he could never have imagined. So click on the video appearing on your screen right now and uncover everything that happened in this story full of twists and turns. See you there.